There we go. Hi, I am Michelle Thompson, and I am the director for the Executive Coaching and Consulting Program at Concordia University in Irvine through the Townsend Institute. That just says a lot of words to put on a really small business card to make you look really important. That's all that really does. Basically, who I am is I am first and foremost a forgiven child of God, which I am so grateful for because every single day I need to live in His grace. And I am a person that I believe He has given a great passion and purpose to connecting with people and loving people and setting up spaces for people to explore His will and His purpose in their life. That's what I believe in, and hopefully that's what you're going to hear through our discussion today. I want you to know, please, at any time, if I'm saying something and you love it, like cheer. If you hate it, don't say anything. No, if you hate it or like, wait, I don't think I agree with you, like say something. Let's make this, we are in a space that we can absolutely have a dialogue. If you have a question, want to go deeper, we can definitely do that. And I'm going to leave plenty of time at the end for us to be able to have questions and answers, or again, for you to get out early and do whatever you want to do with the rest of your day. I'm going to be talking about coaching as a care model today. I'm finding it really interesting that I think this is some newer space that we're going to continue to explore for people who are ministry leaders, whether you're a pastor or a director of Christian education or have some other type of role in ministry. Ministry leaders are sought out in unique ways to be people who will help others. In fact, I usually say to most people, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, is most people go into ministry because they love people. What they don't realize is all the other stuff that comes with it is a really big burden, and sometimes it makes you not like people a whole lot. So there's definitely this like tension that rides when you are in ministry. So as we get started, I do want to just give you a second to center in and get focused here. And sometimes we need to do is we need to say, I'm going to give myself permission. So for the next 90 minutes or less, what is something that you need to give yourself permission to do or not do to be present in this moment? Like right now, I'm going to give myself permission to not think about the next workshop that I'm doing while I'm in the middle of doing this workshop, right? Like going, oh my gosh, do I remember what I'm supposed to talk about that one? So that is something that I'm going to do so that I can be fully present here with all of you. In your mind, what do you need to do or not do to be fully present in this moment? And then when you feel like you've got something, turn around to a neighbor around you and share that one comment. Steve, what are you going to do to stay present? What are you giving yourself permission?
A tough meeting at lunch, so I'm trying to not think about it.
Nice. You gave yourself permission to ponder that later. I love it. I love it. Oh. Great job. You guys caught on to that very quickly. This is something that I love to do whenever I'm speaking, when I'm teaching a class, and when I'm leading meetings, is to kick it off. And so I'm going to kind of share this as a skill practice piece with you, because almost everyone comes into something with a lot of things on their mind that might be distracting them or taking them other places. And think about it, if you're having a leadership meeting with a team, you want them to be present. You want their best efforts right there. So to take a couple minutes and look at everyone and say, what do you need to give yourself permission to? In fact, I usually have Post-it notes, and we write out Post-it notes, the things that I give myself permission to not check my phone or to do whatever. And we share that, at least one with each other, because we say, I'm here. And it's an exercise because it's an intentional exercise. So that is one of your bonus leadership tips that you were not expecting to get, that you got today, to give people permission. So we started off talking about a few seconds ago that there's this difference when we talk about ministry leaders and the expectations of what are placed on you as ministry leaders, people who are in ministry, spouses in ministry, connected in any way. My assumption is that there's some way all of you are connected, whether volunteer or employed, whatever that looks like, you're connected into understanding ministry at some level. What are some of the expectations that come with your roles? Oh, this is an interaction part.
Do you mean like long-term goals, or do you mean like goals for this session?
Expectations that people place on you. So like when you're out there in the world doing your work, what are the expectations that people have on you in your role?
To be available.
Yeah.
To be available. Always available.
To be perfect.
To be perfect.
Have the answers.
Have the answers.
To show measurable growth.
Oh, yes, measurable growth.
That yes is the only word that you ever said.
Oh, yes. Is that true?
For me.
Okay. Good to know.
Know things about them that they've never even shared.
Yes, you're all knowing somehow. Yeah. What's reality? What is reality for you?
If I'm always available, I'm drained.
You're going to get tired out. You have a finite amount of time in your life. You have a life. You have family members that need you. You have relationships that need time. You might have people that you need to be giving care to that are intimate, close relations to you. You might have the expectation that you better be running this ministry financially sound, and you're like, I came here because I love teaching. I don't want to look at an Excel sheet. I don't want to have to figure out this money dollar thing. And so you're sitting here facing the expectations of what people are placing on you. And sometimes the people are placing it on us, and then who else places expectations on us? Ourselves. Because we have this great little voice in our head that starts telling us that we are also supposed to be this, 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 this. And sometimes when I'm coaching people, I'm like, so who told you that? And they stare at me and they're like, well, everyone. I'm like, give me the name of one person. I just name a one person. And they look at me and they're like, they can't, because they realize that it's a voice that has come to them. No one has actually said it, but somewhere inside of them, they've made this expectation up on themselves and are placing it on them. And that's when we have to say, okay, all these expectations are stacking up and piling up, but I have a reality. I have a reality that I have to live within a finite amount of time. I have to live within boundaries, not just boundaries of my time, but of my relationships, what I can give, what I can't give. I can't become codependent. I have to be able to make sure that other people aren't becoming codependent on me. They have to be able to function without me. I have to have a life. I need to make sure that my marriage is in good shape. I need all of these things. We have to put a reality around. We can't always be living up to the expectations. So I would like for you to say right now out loud is, I don't have to live up to expectations.
I don't have to live up to expectations.
Nor can you live up to expectations. What was it like to say that? Freeing. Can you tell me more about freeing?
Yeah, because I think just so much, consciously or subconsciously, it always feels like I'm needing to.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually verbalizing that felt like, oh, yeah.
Yeah,
That was good.
feels freeing. Diane?
I was in the session on worldviews earlier and cross-cultural, and we talked about the Western worldview is a guilt innocence culture.
Mm-hmm.
And saying that made me think, but I feel a little guilty.
Yeah.
That Western mindset.
Yeah, like, but wait a second, I'm supposed to be the best, right? I'm supposed to get to the top. I'm supposed to be able to do all these things for people. My own personal story early on in ministry was helping a friend whose apartment had burnt down. And I kept doing more, and people kept telling me, you are getting too involved. You are going to get sick. You are becoming too involved. You're taking on too much of her issue and her situation. And I kept looking at them saying, but isn't this what I'm supposed to do? She's a person in trouble. She's a person who is homeless now, basically, and she's out of her mind because she's lost everything, and I'm doing what Jesus would do, because Jesus would call the insurance company for her, and Jesus would give her a place to live, and Jesus would run over to her house at 6 in the morning when she's crying and can't get out of bed. Like, Jesus would do all those things, so how can I be okay if I'm not doing those things? Talk about guilt. And until somebody looked at me and said, Michelle, here's the difference. Even if Jesus would do all that, you're not Jesus. The shock of that statement. No, I really wasn't shocked by that statement, but I was like, what is my responsibility? I have a responsibility to show love and care, but not to lose myself, to give what I can. And I had a very dear pastor that worked in our church come up to me, and he kind of patted my hand. And I still believe that my mother or father sent him to me. He says he just came and felt like he needed to say it, but somebody sent him to me. And he patted my hand and he said, Michelle, even when the Good Samaritan helped the man, he took the man to the inn, gave them money, and he had to go on his way. He did what he could, and he couldn't do any more than that. And then he patted my hand and walked away. And I remember standing there being like, well, that's crazy, kind of thing, and wondering who sent him. But it's so true. We do have limits, and that is part of our reality. And so I am grateful that in this space you said, I don't have to live up to expectations. And my hope and prayer just for you and for your care and for who you are is that if that statement was freeing, that you keep saying that to feel free and continue to ask yourself, what do I need to be free of? Where are my boundaries right now so that I'm being healthy in what I'm saying yes to and what I'm saying no to? And for those of you who are like, ooh, I said that, and that felt really uncomfortable and maybe a little bit shameful, that like I'm doing something wrong by saying something like that, and I said it because she told me to say it, and I'm gonna do what I'm told to do, but I don't necessarily believe it. My hope and prayer is that you just choose to consider it. That you just choose to consider what would it be like to truly believe that you are free of expectations and called just to live within your reality, the here and now, with its limits, with the things the skills and gifts you've been given. When we talk about care that way, this is what it basically boils down, all that preaching just boils down to, is for you to maximize your finite time and skills. As we talk about especially the area of giving care as a ministry leader, we are talking about how are you going to maximize your finite time and skills. I was recently speaking with a pastor in a board room, and he started just sharing some of his work, and he started talking about, he goes, sometimes I go home to my wife and I'm like, oh, I can't believe what's happening out there. And he starts sharing the things that people have come in to talk about. Their children that are on drugs, their children who are being aggressive at home, their marriages that are not working, the caregiving of elderly parents, like all of the things. He goes, it just becomes so draining and all-consuming, and I'm like carrying all this. I'm like, and of course, then I wanted to jump into coach mode really quickly. I did not. I held back because he did not ask me to coach him, and I was just being there at the moment. But I wanted to jump in and say, no, that all isn't yours to carry. You get to sit in space with these people, and you can be in that space and still walk away as an individual leaving their things with them and leaving you with you, knowing that you maximized your finite time and your skills in that moment. What this starts to do is it starts to take away this expectation that a lot of us built or were taught as we became ministry leaders, that you are supposed to be there to be the all. You are not Jesus, and there is no cross for you to hang on. You are to be there to do the work that God has called you to do. And I've never seen a job description that says, please sacrifice your well-being, physically, mentally, spiritually, for the well-being of others. And when you do not have decent boundaries and don't maximize what you have here, then you begin to sacrifice yourself for the job. And what happens when people start sacrificing themselves in ministry for the job? Burnout. Burnout happens. That's where we start finding that people have moral things that they fall into. They burn out. Their marriages aren't as good. And now we've got this person in crisis, and that person in crisis feels even more worrisome about trying to find help, because there's the ones who are supposed to. Do you hear this cycle? Like, it's a horrible cycle that it becomes, because the expectation is I'm all right. I have it all together. So coaching is a way for us to maximize our time, maximize our skills, care, and give some boundaries to this way that we give care. Because people will come in, like I said, to your world, and they will want you to fix things. I don't know. How many of you are licensed counselors in here? Thank you. So you do have a degree in being able to work in deep places with people.
As a high school counselor.
As a high school counselor with high school students, right? So there are special things that you can do, but most of us are not even qualified to go into some of the places that some people need to go to be fully healed. I'm going to tell you real briefly what are the differences between these people helping professions, because when you understand the difference between each of these things, you get a better insight into what is my best option, what is the best thing that I should do right now in this situation. So coaching has more of a focus on goals, strengths, potentials, insights, and action. Lots of times you'll hear people talk about the coaching spirit is one that looks forward. Here you are, and that you want to get there, and we're going to work on some of the things that are in the way, whether it's limiting beliefs, barriers, whatever that is, to be able to move forward. Mentoring is advice training and knowledge transfer. I like to explain the visual that I give for mentoring is how many of you have been in deep snow before? I grew up in Michigan for part of my life, and in Michigan the snow would get really high, and I remember following my dad one time, and my dad's footprints would go through the high snow, and so what did I do behind him? I reached to put my footprints in his steps. That's what mentoring is it's saying, hey, I want your story to influence my story. I want to learn about the steps that you've taken, the wisdom that you've gained, and I want you to give that to me and have that type of connection. So it's advice, training, and knowledge transfer. It's usually someone that you just really respect. The way I just said it was, I want your story to influence my story in mentoring. Consulting, sometimes you'll hear people say, hey, I'm a consultant. And what that means is that they really do analysis and recommendations. If you're a consultant, you are supposed to have the answers. You are asked to come into an organization, into a church, into a ministry, look around, assess the situation, let the board or whoever you're working with say, I think this is what's happening right now, and these are the steps that you would take. You have to have some knowledge there. I had a great coaching teacher one time, and he always said, when I'm coaching someone and they say, well, what should I do? He says, well, if you wanted me to give you the answer of what you're supposed to do, then I need to write a new contract for you. This is my consulting contract. Now I will tell you what to do, and you will pay me a lot more money. So that was always his version of it, because you have to have the wisdom to do that. Here's where coaching and what we sometimes see happening comes into like, this is like the big difference right here is with counseling. Counseling has this personal and psychological problems and guidance. Counseling takes us back to heal, and Carol Kaufman has written the book about growth mindset, and she is the leader of Harvard's Institute of Coaching. And I love how she says this: in therapy, you follow the trail of tears with a goal of healing. In coaching, you follow the trail of dreams with the goal of igniting the person to be their best. In counseling, we go back to find the woundedness, to find where there might be trauma, where something happened that needs some healing so that the person can then continue to live life to their fullest. In coaching, we don't go back to all of that. Someone might tell me that they had a traumatic experience, but if that traumatic experience is still impacting them today, I have to look at them and say, I really want to encourage you to see a counselor, because I'm not trained to go to that place and that space. And I want them to have the very best. So I said to all of you, who in here has a licensed counseling degree? If you don't have that, then know that is one boundary, that when someone gets deep into something, know when your boundary is to say, we need to find some more supportive help for you. We need to find deeper help for you. That is not always yours to fix. Just because they come to you as pastor or as DCE or as ministry leader does not mean that that is always yours to fix. And when your head starts telling you, oh my goodness, I'm the pastor, I'm supposed to figure this out, you have to say, right, and my figuring it out might be, where's the best counselor that I can find? Then psychotherapy also goes into that idea of counseling. I'm going to give you one more illustration of the difference between coaching and counseling, because I think it's really important that in the world today, we continue to define these things really well. And here's why I think it's really important to be defining coaching really well, is in counseling, I ask you if you're a licensed counselor, because every state has certain requirements and agreements that have to be made, that have to be fulfilled to get your license and be able to practice as a counselor in that state. And if you move states, you've got to go do all their checklists to be able to practice counseling there. Coaching is the Wild West. Like, there's really nobody guarding it. Like, I could look at all of you and say, hey, what I think you should all do is go put a coaching shingle out and start your coaching business tomorrow. And you'd all be like, oh, okay, I can do that, because there's nobody going to tell me that I can't, right? There's nothing that the state will do. Now, I tend to believe that that's going to change in the next 5 to 10 years, and I've got another very dear coaching friend who's nodding his head. That's not always going to be that way. But here's where it's going to make the difference, is those of us who really work at understanding what coaching skills are and practice good coaching will be seen as those who have the respect to continue doing what we're doing. And I believe that they're going to continue to let us self-regulate. But if we don't begin to do good coaching practices and knowing where our boundaries are, somebody's going to come in and start telling us how and we can do it and how we can't do it. And that becomes really, really tricky. So again, it's a minor soapbox moment, but
Thank you for that. I was wondering, and I appreciate your visual on mentoring.
yeah.
So how would you differ? I come from an education background.
Yeah.
So mentoring is talked about all the time in education. Coaching is kind of catching up.
Yes.
So I see your words up there, and I liked your visual of one of your fathers. But how else would you differentiate or articulate the difference between mentoring versus coaching?
Mentoring versus coaching. So mentoring, I have a beautiful mentor. I've had a number of mentors in my life, but one that's most influential in my life is named Mary. And Mary was a board member at a church that I was working at, and I would sit in board meetings with her, and she would say something, and like the whole room would just like go silent, and whatever she said, you knew was the most wise thing that was being said in that room at that moment. Because and all the time. Like, she didn't speak often, but when she did, it was the most wise thing, and people listened to her and followed her, and I just loved it, and I was like, I want to be Mary. And the only way that I know that I can be Mary is to like spy on her and get to her as close as I can so she rubs off on me. And so I said, hey, do you want to do coffee one day? She's like, hey, sure, that's great. Took her to breakfast, actually. Didn't just buy her coffee. Took her to breakfast. We were visiting, we're talking, and I said to her, I've actually have a confession to make. And she said, what is that? I said, I didn't just want to have coffee with you. I kind of want to ask you to like start spending more time with me. Like I want this to be almost like a dating thing. Like once a month, would you just have breakfast with me? Because I want to learn from you. I want to experience you. I want to know. So that was how that relationship got built. And in that relationship, I could come to her and share stories of things that were happening, and she could share her stories that might align with that, her experiences. She might give me feedback. She might give me input. She might sometimes tell me, yeah, but Michelle, your perspective's all wrong, or, get over yourself, or whatever I needed to hear. That might have been hard truths. So it's much more dialogue. It's much more personal relationship built. The coaching aspect is, and we'll continue to talk about this, is I call it sacred space. Between me and my client, my coachee, there is sacred space, and my job in that experience as the coach is to create this open space of safety for the other person to begin their discussion, begin their dialogue, begin their discovery, and to take us places that they need to go. And my job is to help make sure that they are constantly going the direction they need to go. So my experience, my advice, my wisdom doesn't come into play in the same way as it would in a mentorship. I'm going to give you my other picture between coaching and counseling, and maybe then all these pictures will somehow make a story somehow. When I talk to my students, especially about coaching or counseling, because we get a lot of students who are trying to figure out, do I want to be a coach or do I want to be a counselor, and what thing do I want to do? I say, if you want to go into coaching, or counseling is more like going into the surgeon or going into the doctor saying, my knee really hurts. I don't know what's up with my knee. I can't do anything. I can't move it. And the doctor starts to move it around, sends me in for an MRI, does an x-ray, and decides then what diagnosis there is and what intervention needs to happen. And that doctor decides that the best thing to happen to me is to have a knee replacement. Replaces my knee, we'll make sure that I get all the healing for it and everything else. That's counseling. Something's wrong, it's impeding me, I need to have some type of diagnosis for this thing. And what is that diagnosis to heal me and to get me up and functioning again? The coach is like going to a physical therapist or a personal trainer. I walk in and say, hey, I really want to run a marathon. This is a hypothetical situation, right? Like, I really, really want to run a marathon. And the physical trainer or physical therapist says, okay, so we're going to do some work, and I'm going to get you fit to train for that marathon. And that person might ask me, do I believe I can run a marathon? And no, I don't believe I can. Well, then we'll work through getting a belief system to be able to run a marathon. And they'll say, what other actions do you need to do? I need to exercise, I need to practice, I need to build up. Oh, hey, by the way, is there anything else I should know that might impact your ability to run a marathon? Hey, you know what? 2 years ago I had a knee replacement, and I probably need to pay attention to taking care of my knee in this. The coach, that trainer says, got it. That's an important event that happened, and we're going to make sure that we keep that as knowledge and work with it and to help you continue to move forward. Never will a personal trainer or a physical therapist look at you and say, really? The doctor thought you needed the knee replacement? I'm not sure I would have given you that diagnosis. I'm not sure, could you imagine going into a personal trainer and they start questioning your doctor's, diagnosis and remediation? So does that help a little bit, having those pictures too of this broad difference? And hopefully, I like pictures a lot and metaphors like that, because I also have to think sometimes, am I trying to heal the knee, or am I trying to prepare them for the marathon? What am I trying to do right now? And then sometimes the word comes to me, it says, you're trying to prove you're the wisest person in the room. And I'm like, oh, well, then we're definitely in trouble. Time out, stop, right? If that's where I'm going, then that's going to be a problem. So coaching, when you think about coaching being this person that is going to look at someone where they're at. Think about if you took this approach then to care and loving people. In the world of theology and this idea of pastoral care, the pendulum's really swung, and I was really interested in finding out that there's actually peer-reviewed academic studies on this. I don't know when I became a geek, but I've become a geek. And I love reading things, and they were talking about how this pendulum has swung, that there was a time where everything was theology. If someone came to you as a ministry leader or a pastor, you were expected to say, but Jesus loves you and your sins are forgiven. Confess, you must have done something wrong. Confess your sins. Like, that's the only answer that you need. And then all of a sudden things swung over to, but we're supposed to love each other, and it's within the human, and all these like kind of New Age is coming to my mind, but it's different than that, like that psychological piece of like it's all within your own power to do or to make changes. And that pendulum kept swinging back and forth, and what they're finding, and what I think we can all realize, is that there has to be a balance for this. We have to be able to have a congruency between our theology and religion and this personhood of human beings. We need to be able to hold sound theology and remain true to the experience of people coming to terms with changing times. Our world is changing rapidly these days. Ministry itself has gone through so many changes and is constantly morphing to say, what do people need, and how will people respond to understanding Jesus and a Savior that loves them and their need for this Savior. Especially, I think one of you mentioned our Western world, and like in our Western society, people seem so self-sufficient sometimes that we're like, okay, how do they know that they have a need? How do we help continue to express this to them? And so we have to be able to hold this theology and hold the personhood of who they are and their needs at the same time. So here are some ideas of when coaching will really work for you, when you're in a situation and you're like, okay, this works. First of all, there's no evidence of mental health issues needing therapy. Again, I think one of the most loving things that you can do is to realize that you are free of expectations, to begin to understand that it is loving and kind for you to have boundaries, and for you to define your boundaries and not let them be crossed. And so when someone comes to you and begins to talk about something that you know is deeply rooted in something from their past, you love them, you say, I care about this, and the best way I can care about this is help guide you to someone who has deeper skills or different skills to help you. Here's the hard part with that, is some people are really receptive of that and they love it. Others are not. I was working with a young woman who was really trying to kind of get her grounding and career things going in life, but every single time we talked, she would go into this deep spiral talking about her mother, talking about her childhood, and talking about things of the past that were very deep and not ever really owning things. And she told me one time, she's like, hey, I just got a new job. I'm not sure when I'll be able to talk to you again. I'll let you know. I'm like, okay. So she's gone. About 3 months later, I get a call. And she's like, I'm ready to start talking again. And I thought to myself, I said, Michelle, you know that there's something deeper here. And I said to her, I said, I am willing to work with you again. And I am willing to process what your future can hold. But I have one condition. While you're working with me, you must also commit to seeing a counselor to work on these issues. Because these are places that I can't go with you, but you will never get further than where you are if you don't go there. She said thanks, and I've never heard from her again. And you know, there's a part of you that wants to say, but wait, that was the right answer. I'll call her back. I'll say, okay, forget it. I'll still talk to you, because at least she'd be talking to me, right? At that point, those are those hard moments when you're like, I had a boundary, I had a responsibility. I have to just trust that God will take care of her from this space moving forward. I can't own that. I can be sad for it. I can go to my friends or a colleague and say, I need to grieve this for a moment. I'm really concerned about this girl. But then I have to be able to move on. Again, freeing ourselves from some of the expectations is really a challenge. So when someone comes to you about a difficult decision needing to be made, in a holding pattern that necessitates a new thinking, they have a vision for the future, they're struggling with the tension of who they are, who they want to be, and they're facing a challenge that requires action. You guys get faced with a lot of those, right? There's a lot of situations that can fall into that. What are some situations that you can think of that might fall into some of those areas? Yeah.
So it's a cross-disciplinary situation, but when someone is contemplating divorce in the tail end of abuse and trying to make a decision as a Christ follower, what are my next steps? And you get referrals and things that will come up in that conversation, but
That's an excellent example. You know that for the abuse they might need to work with someone, but what are my next steps? I have this big life change, and I need to have a vision for my future. That's absolutely a coaching conversation that can be had. Another example, yeah.
I had someone call me one. I'm a pastor, so I don't know why she was calling me this. But she had been offered a job that was a little bit further away that paid just a disgustingly higher amount of money, and she wanted to know what I thought. She's like, and like her issue, and I think that's why she thought it was a spiritual issue. She's like, am I just being unsatisfied with the job I'm at? So that was, I would think that's coaching, because it was definitely not a mental health issue. It was
Yeah.
a really weird, not actually wanting more money issue.
It's absolutely, as you're processing, I can see you're processing it, thinking it through. It's absolutely, that could be a coaching conversation. Because I suspect even in her mind, she's like, am I being a good Christian if I do this? So like that's probably why she called you, is she was connecting her spirituality with that piece. And so to be able to say, hey, help me get this vision for my future, talk me through it. Doug, did you have one also?
just for someone considering a career change.
Yeah. And people come to you for those things, right? There's life changes. Yes, there's things as heavy as divorce or teenagers. My kid's still living at home, and they're 33, and they're still in my basement. Like, that's an easy one. That's what I'd be like, just say, go. Like, suitcases on the doorstep. No. But maybe not that bad. Like, yeah, I know. I'm like, that's where those are the bad examples of coaching. But those are realities for people that we're with right now. I mean, we kind of laugh about that, but some people are really going, how do I get my kids out of my house, or how do I get them to be able to stand on their own? You get them you get them a coach, and you get a coach, and everyone starts coaching along the way. There are lots of opportunities. And so part of my encouragement for you is, as you do have people coming to you, is to say to yourself, is this an opportunity that I could actually use a coaching stance? And in that coaching stance, I put the work back on them. I'm going to start with this quote, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about this sacred space. By bringing God's involvement into the lives of people during the pastoral encounter, being human is transcended through the grace of God, the promise of His Word, and the work of the Holy Spirit. That is the gift that we have when we talk about using pastoral care, ministry care as a coaching experience, because we get the full picture of being able to be a full, whole person coach, because we have God in the midst of this. We have His Word and the Spirit working in it. And you'd love to be able to talk about that, because when I go into a coaching room, if I'm coaching a leader of an organization or someone that is not in the Christian realm and I haven't been hired intentionally for that, then I don't get to go in and say, well, can we start with prayer? Can we invite prayer into our space? But here, because of the relationship that you already have established and by the virtue of the role that you already have this ability to invite the Spirit in a really significant and direct way. This is what I talk about with sacred space and the imagery that I have when I talked about the coaching space in between. There's coach, there's person, and what happens is what happens in here. And what happens in this empty space is the first thing that I have to do is I have to remove whatever is going on inside of me. I have to leave my own stuff on the outside. So what I usually do is I usually take a couple deep breaths before I meet with someone and then just gently say, God, whatever is in my way, remove it and let me be present today. Because I want to walk in as a human being as prepared to be present and open as I possibly can be. How you are and who you are as you show up is just as important. And then we look at the person on the other side here, and what we're wanting for them to do is to bring the items into here. Now, do you guys remember like Legos? Like you have boxes of Legos at home, and what do kids do when they have the box of Legos? They come running in, and what's the first thing they do? Dump it. And then you've got Legos everywhere. That's the imagery of this thing, is you want this person to come in and be able to dump whatever they are pondering, thinking, working with into this space. And as it gets into this space, then we begin to look at it and work with it. This is a model that I work with teaching our students that I think helps see the flow of what coaching can look like. I think of it definitely as a flow. Think of it as just a natural kind of dance and movement as you move through. And if you can really remember the 3 words, it'll help you if you don't even remember the bullet points with them. To engage, explore, and evoke. Engage, explore, evoke. Say that with me. Engage, explore, and evoke. So in engagement, in that open space, I'm wanting to connect with that person and get an agreement. So I want to say, hey, I'm really glad you're here today. It's good to see you. How are you? And we do that briefly. We don't go very far. I just want to make sure that we're both kind of taking that time to get settled in to whatever we're doing. For me, it's a lot of settling in on Zoom, because you can coach through Zoom, which is a lovely thing. And then is this really important part of what is most important to you today? What do you want to talk about today? They might have even called you and said, I need to come in. My husband just told me he wants to leave me. I really need someone to talk to. When they come in, even though you've had that information, say to them, what's most important for you to talk about today? And they might go, I told you, my husband wants to leave me. But it might be that it's not that, but they might go, you know what? I just feel so rejected and so lost, and I don't know what I'm going to do. Isn't that deeper? That's so much deeper of knowing what they're bringing in and what they want to talk about and what they want to focus on. It's the first Lego dump in the sacred space. Once you've gotten to this point of understanding a little bit about what the purpose of the conversation is going to be and the intention of the conversation, whether it's how do I get my son out of the house, my husband's leaving me, I'm having, I just don't know if I want to go make that much more money, whatever that is, that really is an amazing conversation, isn't it? You're not the only person who I've had have a conversation like that, but sometimes, interesting.
You did go with the more money for anyone who's curious.
Yeah, I was a little curious.
No, I think if they're offering you that much more, you just go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And tithe, good point. So we get this agreement. Here is where the bulk of the activity happens. And this is where one of the hardest parts is, because you should not be working harder than the other person is. Like when I worked out with a personal trainer for a while, I always left the session dripping with sweat, and she still left with her really cute ponytail. And hi! next time. If I left still with all my makeup on and all matching and looking glamorous, and she was dripping with sweat, would that have been a good workout? No, I mean, I would have probably loved it, but that doesn't make sense, because I'm the one who needed the work to be done. And she just needed to be able to be there to guide me and to coach me along the way in it. So that's what you're doing here. The first thing that you want to be able to do is to have a curiosity. Become curious. Assume you know nothing. If they say, I'm feeling really lonely, become curious about lonely. Some of us might go, oh, I know what lonely is. Yeah, I bet you are feeling lonely. Lonely stinks. I remember when I was lonely one time, my dog ran away and I was really lonely. Do you want to know how disconnecting that is? For it all of a sudden to become about you? It runs away from the person. It does not draw the person in. If they say, I suddenly feel really lonely, and you say, lonely is a hard emotion. What is lonely like for you? I'm really curious. When you say you're lonely, what's your experience of lonely? What would it mean to you to not be lonely? What would it look like for you if you were not sitting in loneliness? When have you not been lonely before? When have you been lonely before? What was that experience like? Is it similar to this experience? Become curious, exploring it, because they need to be able to think more deeply about the experience they are having. There's two things that happen. There's this thing called System 1 and System 2 thinking in our brain. System 1 thinking is that very intuitive, I got it, I can do it, action. If I asked you to tie your shoe, pretty much everyone in here would bend down and be like, and you wouldn't think anything of it because you know how to tie a shoe, right? But if I asked a 4-year-old to tie their shoe, they would be sitting here having to think really hard. What does a tied shoe look like? What are the actions that have to be made? What has to be done? Because it's not a natural, instinctive thing for them. That is System 2 thinking. System 1 thinking is helpful for us when we are navigating life and moving through life, because it helps us, like, if I see someone's face, I remember to go, hi, and I have normal, natural reactions. Or if I see a fire, I naturally go, hey, I should, move. I should not stand here and stare at the fire, deciding what I should do. Now, those System 1 thinking things help us. But in this situation, what we want to do is move them beyond the natural instinct for them to think deeper about something. So I've used this so many times, but if I asked you how many animals Moses took on the ark, you would say?
7 of the clean ones, 2 of the
So some say 2 of every kind and some say 0. Actually, the right answer is 0. The ones who said 2 of every kind are saying, they're like, oh, I heard the word ark and I heard animals, and they went on 2 by 2. Because we've been taught that very early on. But I said Moses, and Moses did not take animals on an ark. At least that we know of. It's from Scripture. And so our brain wanted to use System 1 thinking. But if you listen and you have to ponder it, now you have System 2 thinking. And so when I ask someone, well, what is lonely like for you? All of a sudden they're thinking, what is lonely like? It's easy to say I'm sad, but how do I really know that I'm sad? I'm mad. What does mad really mean? And I start processing mad, and I realize, you know what? I'm not so much mad. I'm more disappointed. And it's coming out as mad. So this is where our curiosity comes into play, is we become curious about the things that they say, and then we're inquiring about it. We're asking the questions. The question that you try not to ask, and I'm horrible because I ask it, but I try to ask it in a tender way so I don't get the response, is, well, why would you think that? When you start a question with why, what usually happens? It's judgmental. It's like, well, why would you ever believe that, you'll never find someone again? Well, because I'm a horrible person and you just verified that for me. And now you got a whole lot of other work to do. Once you can go through this curiosity and inquiry piece and look at it, again, you're looking at it in this empty space, what your role then is to begin to bring awareness to things. The awareness that you can bring is, hey, we've been having a lot of discussion about what loneliness is and how it's impacting you and what it looks like for you. I'm curious, are you becoming aware of any new ideas right now? What's coming up for you now? Sometimes awareness is what we bring in that we've become aware of. And our awareness, a great coach for all of you sitting in your positions that you're in, you're hearing the words, but don't forget that it's not just hearing that gives the impact. You also can see facial expressions. You can also see body movements. All of these things are things that are going to give you cues. Hey, I noticed that every time you say you're lonely, you put your head down. Do you know that you do that? Like, no, I didn't know that, but I'm lonely. And you say, I'm just wondering, what is that about? I had a lot of fun coaching someone the other day because they were telling me how much they really admire a person. And they're like, he is a great guy. He is so good. He loves the Lord and he loves people and he is just awesome. And I actually just started laughing because what's happening right now? He's shaking his head no. And I'm like, okay, I hear the words that are coming out of your mouth, but you are like it wasn't even just like a little shake. It was like, and I'm like, you are like turning your head no, back and forth, back and forth. I'm like, what is this? He's like, I am? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I don't know if it really means anything, but I've got to bring an awareness to this because it is totally opposite of what's going on. That is what you get to do for these people is you're not answering something, but you're bringing an awareness into the center, into the space for them to consider. What does this mean? What does this look like? Hey, you were talking about loneliness a little bit ago, and as you continued the process of talking about it, I saw you start to smile a little bit. What changed in you? What was the difference? What brought that smile? Oh, I started to remember the other night when my cat jumped on my lap and was, just being all cuddly, and it was just kind of a nice moment. Oh, I bet it was nice to have that nice moment there. Thank you for sharing that with me and bringing an awareness to that moment. After you've gotten through some of this curiosity, inquiry, and awareness, especially as you know that time is starting to become to an end and wrapping up, and again, you need to have time limitations on what time you spend with people that's appropriate for the reason you're meeting, is when people leave, they need to leave with something tangible, a step to move forward in. Hey, we've talked a lot about this today. I've noticed these things, you've noticed these things. I'm wondering as you leave here, what do you want to do? What could be something that would be a good action for you to do? And you want to team with this person. Usually, and again, this is where I sometimes get overly bossy in a coaching session, like, hey, how about if you do this? And my people just know that that's what I do. But ideally, you would have the conversation with someone like, hey, what would feel good for you to do? What would be the next step? What could I check in with you on? What would that work look like? And they might say, well, you know what? I will sit with my cat for 2 minutes every day. And I might think to myself, well, that seems like a really low bar. So where I could challenge them and say, how about if you do it 5 minutes a day? If that's bringing you joy. And they're like, okay, I'll do it 5 minutes a day. But you want them to leave with some type of action, and then also to seal in the good juices of the experience. You want them to be able to have a quick reflection. I'm just curious, you walked in here, you had some things heavy on your heart, or you had some opportunities that you were really excited about and were really thinking about them. I'm just curious, as you're walking out of here, what feels different for you? What would that experience be like for you? Because we want them to be able to acknowledge in that reflection that a change has happened. It doesn't always have to be a huge leap. Sometimes you'll be with somebody and you'll be like, holy cow, they totally took a leap. But other times it's just that small step, and we want them to be able to say, you know what? I just realized I chuckled for the first time in about a week. That sounds great. Thanks for sharing that with me. I'm going to hold on to that with you. You hold on to that. See you next time. Or these are our next steps. Maybe there isn't a next time. Maybe you're the entry point and you're helping them move to the next place, and you say, I'm so glad that you can remember that chuckle. My hope is that you carry that sweet memory and that sweet reflection with you as you move forward and continue your journey, as a reminder that you can do this. Whatever that looks like, helping giving them the reflection to seal in that moment. As I mentioned, in the middle of this sacred space, we have a really privileged position. We have a privileged position because we can invite the Holy Spirit through prayer into that space, and the Holy Spirit is the one who comes in and intercedes for us. And to be able to verbalize that and say that in a way that is out there is a beautiful connection point for you and the person you're visiting with. The other piece of this privileged position is we have a worldview, that our worldview comes based on a biblical worldview. And in our belief, we believe that each person is valuable to God, and that each person has been created with a purpose from God. And so we come with this sense of love and value that we give this person already. It is already there in the space. We also have the opportunity to talk to the whole person. There are some people that when I coach them, I ask them, I'm like, just curious, like, how are you feeling about spirituality lately? And they kind of, and everything in me just wants to yell, you need Jesus right now, go to church. And that's my old good Lutheran pastor's daughter bringing up. But that's not my place to do that. Like, I can ask about spirituality, I can ask all the questions, but we have the whole person. You can ask them, like, hey, mentally, where are we at? Physically, where are we at? Emotionally, where are we at? Spiritually, where are we at? And it's okay if they say, you know what, I feel drained, I feel like God's really far away, and we get to have that conversation and say, I bet he does feel really far away right now. Yeah.
As you're going through coaching, do you take notes, and how do you handle that?
So,
in session, after?
Yeah, great question. So different people have different practices. There are people who will take some notes during. Every once in a while, I'll jot down a couple words or phrases that stood out to me, because the person might be saying something and they don't realize they made a really interesting phrase, and I'm just old and I'll forget it if I don't write it down. So I'll jot it down. I am not a typical, like, sit there and take all notes. So I encourage people to use the jot a few words down during the session if possible, because you don't want to lose contact with the person. And if you choose to take notes during a session, and especially if you're live with someone, you might just want to set that up and say, hey, every once in a while I'm just going to jot some things down so I can remember, or to give them the heads up of what you're doing, so they're not feeling judged or like, what are you writing about that over there? And then afterwards, it is really helpful to go back and take a few notes and talk about, hey, this person's experience was this, this, and this. They came in with this. They had some ahas with this. They left with this action and conclusion. Just kind of 3 bullet points along that way. The other thing that I think is just as important as taking notes about a time with a person and keeping that information together is, who am I as I come out of a coaching session? Because rarely do I leave a coaching session that something in me hasn't changed. And it's important for me to say, hey, I feel really exhausted after this session. What is that exhaustion about? Was there something that they said that maybe got something spun up in me that needs a little bit of attention? Or am I exhausted because I did end up working too hard and I didn't leave them enough space, and maybe I took over the session and they didn't? Or, you know what, they started talking about their dad and the passing of their parent, and gosh, I didn't realize that all of a sudden now I'm grieving the loss of my dad a little bit. Like, it's really helpful to also have that personal reflection for yourself, because there is no way that you sit as an untouched or kind of abstract, outside the circle person. You are, even though you are giving them the space, you are still part of that space, and things will happen for you.
That's great, thank you.
And then the last thing about this is there's the existing relationship. They're going to come to you because you're their pastor. They already have a relationship. They know that even if they're just seeing you preach on Sundays and that they're not hanging out with you all the time, they still know that there's this like thing about you that is a relationship, that's already a connection. And that's a really beautiful thing when you are in a coaching connection with giving care to others, because they already have a little bit of that trust built up there for you. And you are already able to set the stage of, I'm willing to be in this space with you, and this is how I'll be in this space with you. Yeah.
Maybe you're getting to this.
Nope. I'm actually getting really close, like, let you guys ask questions.
And then I know coaching takes time to build that trust relationship, but if you're non-Christian or you don't know if they're Christian or not, and you truly have a heart for them and you want them to know Jesus, as you said, in that safe space, you very nicely laid out what you do and don't do. But how do you, for lack of a better term, get that out there?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what do you do with that, or don't you do that?
It's so hard. And so I would say to you, it depends on how the relationship is established in the very beginning. If the relationship is established, like this one young lady that I mentioned, the relationship's established as she's my coaching client. And so and she knows that I'm a Christian, her dad's a pastor, and he's the one who and sometimes I'm like, well, you know, her dad's a pastor, maybe I should be bringing it up. But that's not how we started off. And so for me to go there would actually be breaking part of a trust with her, because she also grew up in a home environment where everything felt very legalistic. So for me to all of a sudden start talking about who's Jesus could actually push those things back, and her being like, I can't go any place where I can just be me. Now, I would say that especially when we're talking about ministry, within ministry, or if someone has come to you out of the sense of knowing that you are a ministry person and that they approach that, I think it's okay to bring that into this space with permission. So asking for permission is really important in coaching, and I didn't say that before, but sometimes, like, if I make an observation that someone has done like some weird eye twitch or something, all of a sudden I'm like, are you okay if I make an observation about something? Or may I share an anecdote right now? Or may I? And I don't think anyone's ever really said no, because that would be weird, but they can say no, and they might say no. And so if I felt like, hey, you know what, I'm feeling this nudging, you're tap dancing around some things, would you be okay if I shared my experience of my faith life with you? And that's how I would take it, is I'm going to share my experience, and then you can do with it whatever you want. Yeah, Doug.
Michelle, I love the delineation you do between coaching and mentoring. And so in reaction to that question, but that feels to me like that would be shifting, aside from the permissions angle, sharing your faith angle, coaching is about questioning them, drawing them out, not as much about leveraging your own personal expertise.
That is true. If they were saying something like I don't know what to believe, or things like that, there are moments or times where it is appropriate to say, hey, I can identify with you in this. Are you okay if I identify with you in this moment? Because that is a need that some people have, but it can't become the main action. It shouldn't become the main piece. It should be the one-off moments there. And sometimes, there's lots of times that I'm coaching people that they'll ask me specifically, like, hey, I'm trying to work on visioning stuff, or I'm trying to figure out this thing at my work. And I just say, all right, I'm just going to go into teacher mode and I need to teach you a couple things. Or is it okay if I go into consultant mode for just a minute? But I acknowledge that I am changing hats at that. So that's what's important, is there's to acknowledge that you're going to change the hat and not stay as a coach at that moment. Sam?
I've done that also, and when I take that hat off, then I will say, now, did that mean anything to you? Toss it out, or how did that fall on you? How did that land? And sometimes they'll say, oh, that made me think of this or that. And sometimes they'll say, no, that's not me at all. I'm like, that's fine, because I'm kind of testing out my own, what I'm observing.
Yes.
But yeah, if you say I'm taking that hat off now and putting this one on, and just then let them do with it what they will.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience. And it did make, the other thing that it made me realize is sometimes as a coach, I always tell my coaching students, coaching is not giving people a multiple choice question or test. Like, hey, are you feeling mad, sad, or like really happy right now? I'm like, what if it's none of those? And now you've told them that they've got to feel one of these three ways. Like, just say, what's happening right now? What's the emotion is coming up for you right now? And let them name it, because it's probably not going to be the name or term that you're going to give it to. Or I love that, like, hey, I've got some, because we're part of it, I sometimes have to go, wait a second, I just got to tell you, I've got some emotion coming up for me right now as you're saying this. And I don't see you having any emotion. So can you just speak to that? Like, can we just take a moment and inquire and be curious about that? Why am I feeling attention and you're not? And then I realize it's about me, or we realize that they're just trying to deny it, and they're like, oh, maybe I should have probably felt something. So, yeah.
In the engage, explore, and evoke, can you give a question that would clearly be the engage part, that the purpose of the conversation or the purpose of the meeting? I don't want to sound like I'm judging them or pigeonholing them at the beginning, or saying, okay, you've got an agenda, we've got an agenda, but how do you do that in a soft way to say, what's the purpose of our conversation? I'm thinking of more of like in a pastoral care where somebody comes to me and it's not an official, I can make an appointment with the pastor, but it's like after church and they've got an issue or whatever. How do you ask that question? What does the question sound like to engage?
So let's do that a little bit. Your name is again, I'm sorry. Max. Max, why don't you be whoever's coming up, and I'll be the ministry leader person, and let's see what we get.
Okay. Hi, Pastor. Can I...
That was recorded. Okay, sorry.
Hi, non-gender ministry person. Can I talk to you for a minute?
Absolutely. Max, what's up?
I really need some help in, I just don't know what to do with my job situation.
Wow, sounds like you have some stuff going on. As we're having this discussion, what matters the most to you right now with the job situation?
Contentment in my job. I want to feel like I'm doing something important.
Okay. So contentment, let's talk about that. Like, let's explore that a little bit. So the question I used there was, what's the most important thing to you about that topic? Because that's one of the questions I like to use a lot, is because people will say, I'm worried about my sick mom. Well, when you think about your sick mom and worry about her, what's the largest worry, or what's the most important thing? Because that will help pull out what the topic needs to be, and you can start with that.
Is it okay if I take notes on my phone while you're...
You are. So, do you want to keep role playing that, or you're good? So, other thoughts and questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to ask, will you give us the slide?
I can absolutely do that. I will put out a piece of paper. Actually, I'll just pass a piece.
You could go to the app and request it.
Oh, do that.
Give your ad, give you
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Roger. Yeah. Do you know how to do that?
I have no clue.
If you don't, just come up to me afterwards. I'll get your email address.
If my daughter was here, I would just hand the phone.
Right. Right. But yeah, I can make sure that you guys get that. other ways that might be helpful or situations? Yeah.
So you've cultivated the skills of excellent questions in that Explore category. And I'm curious as to how did you cultivate that skill?
Mm-hmm.
What was your journey like a little bit? And then also, how do you ever apply that skill to your own personal, if you would, quiet time or introspection?
Those are great questions. So one thing that's really, really important is we have got to take care of ourselves. I mentioned when we go into this coaching space to do kind of a quick scan of yourself and say, is there something that I'm going through that I need to set aside, or do I need to quiet myself, and so I can be released of my stuff. The only way that I can even be aware of my stuff is if I have sat on the other side of a coach and a therapist and been intentional about doing some work. So all of us can use that. All of us can sit there and be able to say, hey, I know that I've got some of these little twerks and quirks and things that I need to work on. So absolutely taking care of yourself, getting some of that help yourself, being able to say, I'm free of expectations, I don't have to be perfect, is so important. Because if you can release the idea that we have to be perfect people or that we're going to hit perfection on this side, it is so freeing. Like, that just opens you up for so much more possibility. And so then when I do feel a tension within myself, I can explore it and I can ask my questions. Why is this tension coming? Where is it coming from? Why am I having it? And I do start asking those questions because I know it's not a natural feeling within me. I take time to become aware. My shoulder's really tight right now. What burden do I feel like I'm carrying? You know, I do those types of things. Just Wednesday night, I got here and saw something online that kind of messed with me for a second. And I was getting kind of on my high horse and being like, well, what are they thinking they're doing? And da da da. You know, I created a story within myself that I had been excluded, and that I wasn't valued, and that this other part of the organization wasn't doing something right. Like, I had just created a story, and it was messing with my brain. You guys can understand this, right? Like, I'm not the only person doing this. Please. Like, you guys have created stories in your head, right? And then I was like, okay, Michelle, like, you've got stuff to do. Like, you've got to write tonight, you've got a project to do, and all you can think about is this thing. And so I had to kind of do a miniature coaching of myself and say, what is bothering you about this? And I had to right size it and give it some perspective. Why is this bothering you? What does it really mean? What's really happening? What part of you really is feeling attacked? Okay, your pride is being attacked. Is it really attacking your pride? Is it really telling you that you're no good at what you do, or that you're not valued? No, it's not telling me that. Just the internal judge is telling me that. And yes, I've just made a bigger deal out of something that shouldn't be that big of a deal. And so I can talk myself through that. On top of that, you also have to have really great connections. So the next day I was talking to someone who is very close and dear to me, and I said, hey, last night I totally went off the edge. I had this thought, this thing happened, I started telling myself all this stuff, and this is how I resolved it. I even told her I was able to resolve it. And she was like, oh, Michelle, I'm so sorry you went through that. That kind of stuff is rough. That's really hard. You know, and so I have that connection. We have to do that to stay healthy on ourselves to be able to do these things. The asking questions, when you continue to do these things for yourself, it gives you more space for other people. And when you are taking care of yourself and finding your healthiest self, I have more space to listen to Steve and not think that if Steve is talking about something in missions and the difficulty in missions, that in my head he's somehow trying to tell me that I'm a horrible missionary. Like, I don't make that up. I can really stick with him and really hear what he's saying and what he's saying about it. And if I really listen to what he's saying about it, then I find the question. What is he really saying? What is he saying without me having, like, we do this. We start our answers before the person has even said the second word of the question or told us the second word of the story. What would happen if you waited and let the person finish what they were saying, and even if there was a pause, and then you thought about it and spoke? That's a part of the training. So that definitely helps the questions. And if you go online and Google, what are some powerful coaching questions, you will find lists to help you. But I usually keep in my pocket like what matters most to you? What is that experience like for you? What is that lonely emotion, experience, situation like for you? Tell me more about what happened. Like, there's a couple of those that...
I think I'll use on my wife.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I have... So I have students have that come back to class, and they're like, yeah, my spouse told me to stop trying to coach them. Because they're practicing these new skills. But I've also had students who, when they leave our program, they've had their spouse come on and do part of the oral report with them and say, my husband is better and our home life is better because he's been part of this program and learned these skills. So it changes everything when you do this. It changes who you are personally. It changes how you relate professionally and personally.
So when you were talking earlier, it sounded like you were saying you need to be in touch with your feelings. If that's true, what are some of the ways that you can become more sensitive to your own feelings? Yeah, great question. So absolutely getting assistance like counselors or coaches that will help you work on those things. I also have a great conference experience that I can share with you if you're interested. One interesting way to do it is there is something, if you look it up on Google, the feelings wheel, if you've never heard of that before. And the feelings wheel is concentric circles, and it starts off in the center with the basic feelings of like sad, happy, angry, and then it breaks sad into like 4 categories, and then it breaks out those categories into more categories. So you can say to somebody, and we use this with kids. This is a great story. I did this with a coaching client. Taught him the feelings wheel. I left that call feeling so good because he's like, I'm going to hang this up on the refrigerator wall, and this is going to be awesome. My family, my kids. I'm like, oh, this is going to change your whole family. He texted me 5 minutes later, and he said, my wife just pointed out this has been hanging on our refrigerator for the last 6 months. Like, well, great. She's like, I use it with the kids all the time. But the feelings wheel is like, it's so great because it gives you language. Like, you look at it and it says, I'm sad. Okay, well, what are the breakdowns of sad? Well, one thing about sad might be disappointed, or it might be annoyed, or it might be something else. And does one of these explain it more so I can get in touch with that more, and it gets that deeper feeling along the way. So that's one of the best ways I love to do it.
It's in the preliminary.
The feelings wheel? Yay! Okay. The concept. Awesome. Yep. That's awesome. So, other thoughts, questions? Let me just say thank you for spending your afternoon with me. I know that you've had a long day and a half already, and I really appreciate your time and your energy. And if there's ever anything that I can do or help with any of this, I would love to be able to do that. Thanks.
Thank you.